I'm back, and today we're going to be talking about anxiety management and some tips that will help you that are not mindfulness or breathing exercises. If you're new to my videos, hello, my name is Kate. My channel is a little all over the place, but we spend a lot of time talking about mental health and life here. I am a licensed therapist and I want to help people see their potential so then they can live their ideal lives. But a disclaimer, these videos are not a substitute for therapy. They're not intended to replace treatment, so please keep that in mind. Anyway, back to anxiety management. I have been seeing an increase with anxiety symptoms with my clients recently, so I figured this was a pretty relevant topic to bring up. And today I want to focus a little bit more on the source rather than the exercises that you see all over the place. Because real talk, it's super frustrating on my end to see people go and try all these different strategies that may or may not work when they don't really know the cause and what they're trying to treat. So let's get into it. If we're going to do this right, we need to talk about what anxiety is. I don't know about you, but I feel like it's become such a buzzword on social media. Or maybe it's just an umbrella term that people use because they may not be able to articulate what they're actually feeling. I want to know that you actually have to meet criteria for a diagnosis. And I'll pop the DSM-5 on the screen for you to see an example. There's a lot. Anyway, what is anxiety? Anxiety is a natural response to stress or danger, and it can become so excessive that it interferes with your daily life. And it can manifest in different ways, whether that's physical or psychological. It's characterized by either worry or fear, along with the symptoms that you'll see in section 3 of the DSM that I put on the screen. Some people may experience generalized anxiety where there's a specific trigger, or it could even be a response to a specific situation, or for some individuals, a phobia. And this is also, I think, what makes me a little bit upset about it, is that there are, I think, 11 different types of anxiety disorders. It's not just anxiety. It's not a blanket for everything. You have like social anxiety or separation anxiety, but today we're only gonna focus on generalized. So tip or lesson number 1, window of tolerance. This first tip is more so psychoeducation. Sorry. I'm introducing you to the window of tolerance model, and it is hefty, so please bear with me. There's an optimal range of emotional arousal where we can effectively cope with stressors or challenges that we face. Now, when you're in your window of tolerance, you can still respond to the demands of that stressor without a lot of difficulty. But when you've experienced trauma, it becomes a lot more difficult to regulate your emotion. And trauma also causes that window of tolerance to become a lot more small. A lot smaller, or a lot more narrow. And what we forget is that stress or any type of trigger can push us out of that window, even if it seems really minor. So what I want you to do is to imagine this little window right here. This is your window of tolerance. When you're mentally here, you feel in control, you feel grounded and regulated. Even when you're faced with stressors, you feel that you can handle it without worrying. Just above it and just below it are 2 states that we can enter. We have hyperarousal and hypoarousal. And of course, I will put some stuff on the screen for you for visuals. Let's start with hyperarousal. What does this look like? This is when you enter that fight, flight, or freeze state, and you may not feel in control of your actions. You may have angry outbursts, panic, hypervigilance, or even tight muscles when you're like really tense. More common symptoms are irritability or difficulty concentrating. Now, hypoarousal. You ever just shut down whenever you're feeling really stressed? You might retreat and it even becomes really difficult for you to form a thought. In this state, you might feel numb, you might feel really blank, empty. For a lot of individuals, they find it really difficult to speak. So pause for a second and ask yourself, which state do I normally enter whenever I'm feeling stressed or overwhelmed? And that's another thing. Whenever individuals tell me that they're feeling overwhelmed, you have to clarify, is it a positive feeling of being overwhelmed? Is it a negative feeling? That makes a huge difference. I bring this up because you need to know what dysregulates you. And I love this infographic from Mind My Peelings because it adds this section in between window of tolerance for dysregulation. Although it feels like we go from 0 to 100 whenever we're stressed, there are usually symptoms that we feel before we hit 100. It's just super difficult to identify those. But here I am telling you, identify those. In the state of dysregulation, you start to feel uncomfortable. You feel discomfort. Something's off, but you still have control. Now again, once you lose that sense of control, that is when you enter that state of hyper or hypoarousal. Are you following me at all right now? So the tip within this is to identify 2 things. 1, what brings you into a state of dysregulation? And 2, do you typically become hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused? This is a great place to start if you want to truly understand your anxiety, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. How do you expect to develop a plan to address your anxiety if you can't even identify the source? But more importantly, the way that I see it, how can we use this information to prevent anxiety symptoms? Okay, the next tip, if you can even call it that, is to identify your symptoms. I literally just asked you to figure out what brings you into a state of dysregulation, and you may be like, what? So let me explain. Like I said before, when you start feeling uncomfortable, you're becoming dysregulated. You're still in control, but slowly but surely, it starts to feel like it's slipping away. What does that look like for you? What does that feel like for you? Again, it feels like we're going from 0 to 100, but we typically have a brief stage in between where these symptoms are present. It's like a common example. Imagine, because I know we've all been there, an interaction with someone who is really testing you, and you find that there's an increase in your frustration the more and more you're talking to them. Then they finally say something and that was your last straw. So you snap, whatever that looks like to you, which is actually a good question. Are you hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused? Do you react in a way where you start yelling at them, getting very in their face? Or are you someone that just shuts down and is like, I can't even listen to you anymore, I can't even speak to you? That stage of increased frustration is when you're becoming more dysregulated. When you snapped, that is when you were pushed into that either hyper or hyper-arousal. Think about physical sensations, thoughts, emotions. Sometimes for me, it could look like fidgeting with my hands. Usually it's like under the table. I avoid eye contact because for some reason, people misread my face and that gets me really angry. It's also like distracting me from what the actual problem is. Or I become quiet, which if you know me well, you know that is pretty unusual. It's situational. The signs may not look the same all the time, which is why it's that much more important that you know what they are. Imagine how many situations you could potentially prevent, or at least understand why they happened, if you were more mindful of your emotions and what's happening to you in those stages. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about because so many times, like I said in the beginning of the video, people will go with, okay, I gotta practice breathing exercises, I have to practice mindfulness. What happens if you don't know the right time to do it? What happens if you're doing it too late? I like to tell clients that this should be early steps. If not step 1, then step 2. Understanding your window of tolerance, what you're able to handle, and how that impacts your stress and the responses that you have to people. This goes into this is why I wish I could just talk with all of you and have sessions with all of you, but you have to be able to identify, are you reacting to a situation or are you responding to a situation? Whew, I am rusty. Reacting to something is very emotions-based. You are leading with your emotions. When you're responding to something, you're able to step back, put that aside, and think logically about it. Let's say that there's a situation where someone is hyper-aroused. They go into that state of being very in your face, being loud, being overwhelmed in that way. They may be leading with their emotions. That's typically when you say things you don't mean, or you just say that whatever comes to mind because it's how you feel. And even though you think you're expressing yourself, you're not responding to the situation for what it is. It tends to do more harm than good down the line. So I really encourage you to reflect on what your window of tolerance is, what keeps you in that state, and then also what makes it smaller. What situation happened in your life that brought you to a place where your window is so narrow? From there, once you start addressing and acknowledging what the sources are, that is when you'll get the most out of those breathing exercises, the mindfulness, the meditation, which you're kind of being a little bit mindful already. So it's a start. Mindfulness is not always just meditation. So yeah, that's today's video. Coping mechanisms are really helpful, but they may be more effective when you have a better understanding of the source of your anxiety. This is such a complex topic and I would love to go into it more if you're interested. So let me know your thoughts on today's topic. If you are someone struggling with anxiety, please remember you are not alone and there is help out there. I hope that this video gives you something to ponder about. So feel free to subscribe. If not, feel free to follow me on Instagram. My handle is intricate. Otherwise, I'll see you at the next one. Feels good to be back. Thank you. Bye.